Keep your Islamic prayers to yourself. Lady, this is an American airline. The brutal slap resonated through first class as flight attendant Rebecca Carlson's hand connected with Amara al-Rashid's face, interrupting her whispered duet as she held her 6-month-old daughter. What Rebecca didn't know was that the quiet Muslim woman in the $4,000 designer abaya would cost Delta Airlines $800 million when her billionaire husband's voice echoed from the cockpit speakers. If you want to witness how one moment of religious hatred became the most expensive slap in aviation history, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about justice at 30,000 feet. But let's go back to where it all began. The Emirates A380 first class cabin gleamed like a luxury hotel suite as Amara al-Rashid settled into seat 1A, her pearl-encrusted hijab catching the ambient lighting. Her custom-made abaya, hand-stitched in Milan with golden threading, whispered against the leather as she adjusted her sleeping 6-month-old daughter Layla in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around a diamond bracelet that cost more than most people's cars, but Amara barely noticed the extravagance. Her mind was focused on Maghrib, the evening prayer that called to her soul as the sun set over Dubai International Airport. Flight attendant Rebecca Carlson watched from the galley with narrowed eyes that had perfected the art of passenger profiling over her 12-year career. The sight of Amara's hijab triggered every prejudice Rebecca had carefully cultivated since 9/11, every stereotype she'd absorbed from cable news and social media echo chambers. A Muslim woman in first class felt wrong to her, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong space. The expensive clothing only made it worse. Where did people like that get money for such luxury? Amara began her prayers with the quiet reverence of someone whose faith ran deeper than ocean currents. Allahu Akbar, she whispered, barely audible above the cabin's gentle hum. Her daughter slept peacefully against her chest, tiny lips curved in an innocent smile that should have melted any rational person's heart. But Rebecca heard those Arabic words and felt her blood pressure spike with manufactured outrage. "Excuse me." Rebecca approached with a false smile flight attendants reserved for problem passengers. "We're about to take off. You need to put your baby in a car seat and stop that chanting." The word dripped with disgust, as if prayer itself was somehow offensive to aircraft operations. Amara looked up with dark eyes that held surprising patience, given the obvious hostility radiating from Rebecca. "I'm simply praying, and my daughter is perfectly secure," Amara replied in accented English that spoke of expensive international education. Islamic prayer doesn't interfere with safety regulations. Her voice carried the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to explaining her faith to people who had no interest in understanding it. Rebecca's imagination filled with dangerous assumptions. Arabic prayers, coordinated timing, foreign woman with suspicious amounts of money. The narrative wrote itself in her prejudiced mind like a bad thriller novel. "Ma'am, this is making other passengers uncomfortable," she said, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. Amara glanced around the cabin. The businessman in 2A was absorbed in his laptop. The elderly couple in 1C was sleeping peacefully. The young mother in 2C was reading to her toddler, completely unbothered by whispered prayers. Nobody seemed uncomfortable except Rebecca, whose discomfort stemmed from prejudice rather than genuine concern. "I don't see any uncomfortable passengers," Amara observed quietly. "Only an uncomfortable flight attendant who seems disturbed by the sight of a Muslim woman praying." The observation hit like a surgical strike, exposing the ugly truth Rebecca preferred to keep hidden behind professional courtesy. Rebecca's face flushed red with embarrassment and rage. Being called out publicly for discrimination wasn't part of her script. She was supposed to be the authority figure, the one maintaining order and safety. "Listen here," she snapped, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. "I don't care what you call it. This is an American airline operating under American rules." The irony was staggering. Emirates was a Dubai-based airline, making Rebecca's nationalism even more absurd. But logic had abandoned her the moment she'd seen Amara's hijab and heard Arabic prayers. "Keep your Islamic prayers to yourself. Lady, this is an American airline." Rebecca's voice cracked with hysteria. Amara held her daughter closer, protective instincts flaring as Rebecca's aggression escalated. "My prayers hurt no one," she said softly. "I have every right to practice my faith." But Rebecca was beyond reason, beyond professional standards, beyond human decency. The slap came without warning. Rebecca's palm connected with Amara's hijab-covered cheek with a crack that echoed through the first-class cabin like a gunshot. The baby startled awake, beginning to cry as her mother's head snapped sideways from the impact. Silence fell over the cabin like a burial shroud. Amara's hand went to her stinging cheek, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. In 32 years of life, including extensive travels through Europe and America, she had never been physically assaulted for praying. The baby's cries grew louder, sensing her mother's distress with the intuition that only infants possessed. Rebecca stood over them, breathing hard, her hands still burning from the impact. "That's what happens when you don't listen," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and self-righteousness. "Security will escort you off this aircraft immediately." The businessman in 2A finally looked up from his laptop, his mouth falling open at the scene before him. The elderly couple was now fully awake, staring in horror at what they just witnessed. The young mother in 2C began recording on her phone, her journalist instincts activated by the obvious injustice unfolding before her eyes. Amara sat perfectly still, cradling her crying daughter while processing the assault. Her cheek burned with pain and humiliation, but something else was building in her chest. Not rage, but steel-cold determination. Rebecca had no idea that the woman she'd just struck was wearing jewelry worth more than Rebecca's annual salary, carrying a handbag that cost more than most people's cars, and married to a man whose wealth could reshape entire industries. "You just made a very expensive mistake," Amara said quietly, her voice carrying a dangerous calm that made Rebecca's confidence waver for the first time. The baby's cries seemed to underscore the gravity of what had just transpired, echoing through a cabin that would never be the same. Rebecca felt the first flutter of uncertainty in her stomach. Something about Amara's reaction didn't match her expectations. This wasn't how assault victims were supposed to respond. This was the calm of someone who held power Rebecca couldn't imagine. The revolution had begun with a slap. The reckoning would arrive with a phone call that would change everything. The phone in Amara's designer handbag began to ring with a custom tone that sounded like crystal bells. Rebecca flinched at the sound, her confidence already shaken by Amara's eerily calm response to being assaulted. The businessman in 2A leaned forward, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. "Answer it," Rebecca demanded, trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping through her fingers like quicksand. "Make it quick before security arrives." But Amara ignored her completely, gently bouncing her daughter to soothe her cries while the phone continued its melodic chiming. The young mother in 2C whispered in her live stream, "She just slapped a Muslim woman holding a baby. This is insane." Her viewer count was climbing rapidly as the footage spread across social media platforms. Comments flooded in expressing outrage and disbelief at what they were witnessing. "I said answer your phone." Rebecca's voice cracked with desperation. Something about Amara's complete lack of fear was unsettling her in ways she couldn't articulate. Most assault victims cowered or fought back. They didn't sit with this kind of serene confidence while cradling expensive handbags and wearing jewelry that caught the cabin lights like tiny suns. Amara finally reached for her phone, a limited edition device that Rebecca had only seen in magazines. The caller ID displayed simply Habibi with a heart emoji, but the area code was one Rebecca didn't recognize. International. Expensive international. "Darling," Amara answered in Arabic, her voice soft and loving despite the red handprint still visible on her cheek. The conversation continued in fluid Arabic that made Rebecca's skin crawl with xenophobic assumptions about secret communications and foreign conspiracies. "Speak English," Rebecca shouted, loud enough to wake the elderly couple who had dozed off again. "This is an American aircraft." The irony of her statement on an Emirates flight seemed lost on her completely. Her prejudice had blinded her to basic geography and airline ownership. Amara switched to English, her accent adding elegant cadences to each word. "Yes, my love, I'm fine. Just a small problem with the flight attendant." She looked directly at Rebecca while speaking, her dark eyes holding secrets that made Rebecca's stomach twist with growing unease. The voice on the other end was male, speaking in rapid Arabic that carried undertones of concern and rising anger. Even through the phone speaker, His voice carried an authority that made passengers instinctively lean forward to listen. Rebecca caught fragments that sounded like questions, demands for information about what exactly was happening. "She struck me," Amara said simply in English, ensuring everyone in first class could understand. "Yes, while I was holding Layla." She said Muslims aren't welcome on American Airlines. The casual way she delivered this information made it sound like she was discussing the weather rather than a federal assault charge. The voice on the phone exploded in multiple languages: Arabic, English, and what sounded like French. Even Rebecca could hear the fury building in his tone, the kind of rage that came from someone who possessed the power to act on their anger. This wasn't the impotent fury of an ordinary passenger's spouse. This was something else entirely. Rebecca grabbed for the phone, her professional mask completely abandoned. "Give me that device. You're not allowed to make international calls during taxi." But Amara pulled the phone away with surprising strength, her designer bracelet catching the light as she moved. "Security to first class immediately," Rebecca called over the intercom, her voice shaking with desperation. "We have an uncooperative passenger refusing to end unauthorized communications." The businessman in 2A started recording on his own phone, sensing that he was witnessing something historic. The voice on Amara's phone had grown quieter, but somehow more menacing. Rebecca could hear him asking specific questions about flight numbers, crew names, and company protocols. Questions that suggested intimate familiarity with airline operations from the inside. "Flight 237, Emirates First Class." Amara answered his questions with precision. "The flight attendant's name tag says Rebecca Carlson. She seems to think she has authority to assault Muslim passengers." Her voice remained steady, but Rebecca detected something new in her tone: anticipation. Rebecca's radio crackled to life. "Crew member Carlson, this is Captain Walsh. We're receiving some unusual communications in the cockpit. Is there a situation in first class?" The captain's voice carried confusion and growing concern. "Just a difficult passenger, Captain," Rebecca replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Something was happening that she didn't understand, connections being made that were beyond her comprehension. Amara was still speaking quietly into her phone, occasionally laughing at something her caller said. The laughter was what terrified Rebecca most. Women who had just been assaulted didn't laugh. They didn't sit calmly discussing the incident as if it were merely interesting rather than traumatic. They didn't wear jewelry worth more than houses, or carry phones that probably cost more than cars. "Darling," Amara said into the phone, "I think it's time they knew who they're dealing with." She smiled at Rebecca for the first time, expression that held no warmth whatsoever. "Yes, I think the announcement would be appropriate now." Rebecca felt ice forming in her veins as the cockpit speakers crackled to life. The cockpit speakers crackled with static before a deep, commanding voice filled the entire aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Khalid Al-Rashid, Chairman and CEO of Emirates Airlines." The words hit the first-class cabin like lightning strikes. Rebecca's face went white as sheet metal. "I've just been informed that one of my flight attendants has physically assaulted my wife while she was praying and holding our infant daughter." His accent carried the authority of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. The businessman in 2A dropped his phone, his mouth hanging open in shock. Rebecca staggered backward, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice cracked with dawning horror. The woman she'd slapped was married to the man who signed her paychecks, who controlled her career, who could end her life with a single word. Amara remained perfectly calm, gently rocking baby Layla, while watching Rebecca's world collapse in real time. "Darling," she said into her phone, "tell them about the cameras." Her smile held the cold satisfaction of justice finally arriving. "Every interaction in our first-class cabin is recorded in high definition." Khalid's voice continued over the speakers. "We have clear footage of Ms. Rebecca Carlson striking my wife for the crime of praying while Muslim." The young mother's live stream exploded past 50,000 viewers as the revelation sent shockwaves across social media. Captain Walsh's voice came over the intercom, shaking with panic. "Mr. Al-Rashid, sir, we had no knowledge of this incident. We're investigating immediately." But everyone knew investigations were meaningless when the CEO's wife had been assaulted on camera by his own employee. Rebecca collapsed into an empty seat, hyperventilating as the full weight of her actions crashed down on her. She had struck the most powerful woman in the company. On camera, while she was holding a baby. During prayer. The lawsuit alone would destroy Emirates' reputation for years. Ms. Carlson, Khalid's voice addressed her directly through the speakers, making her flinch as if she'd been struck herself. Your employment with Emirates Airlines is terminated immediately. Security will escort you off my aircraft upon landing, where you'll face federal assault charges. Amara finally stood, her designer abaya flowing like silk water as she adjusted her hijab with dignity, intact despite the red handprint still visible on her cheek. Rebecca, she said softly, this is what happens when prejudice meets consequence. The cabin fell silent except for baby Layla's soft cooing and the hum of engines carrying them toward the most expensive landing in aviation history. Rebecca's radio crackled one final time. Ms. Carlson, report to the cockpit immediately for termination procedures. The revolution was complete. The reckoning had only just begun. The aircraft descended toward Dubai International Airport as Rebecca Carlson sat in the crew quarters, stripped of her uniform and wearing a passenger blanket like a defeated prisoner. Her Emirates ID badge lay shattered on the floor where she'd thrown it in a moment of desperate rage. Through the small window, she could see news vans already gathering on the tarmac, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun of her destruction. Amara al-Rashid had returned to her seat, baby Layla sleeping peacefully against her chest as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The young mother's live stream had reached 200,000 viewers, with major news networks now broadcasting the footage globally. Hashtag Emirates discrimination was trending worldwide, and Rebecca's face was becoming the symbol of airline prejudice. Captain Walsh emerged from the cockpit, his gold stripes seeming dimmer as he approached Amara with the careful deference reserved for royalty. Mrs. Al-Rashid, please accept our deepest apologies. This behavior does not represent Emirates Airlines' values. His voice carried the weight of someone trying to save his own career from the wreckage of Rebecca's stupidity. Captain, Amara replied with glacial politeness, your apologies are noted. But this isn't about one employee's prejudice. This is about systematic discrimination that my husband will address comprehensively. She gestured toward her phone, where Khalid's voice could still be heard coordinating with legal teams and media relations departments across 3 continents. The businessman in 2A approached hesitantly, his earlier recordings now uploaded to every social media platform he could access. Ma'am, I want you to know that what I witnessed was completely unacceptable. I've sent all my footage to CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera. His voice carried the moral clarity of someone who had witnessed injustice and chosen to act. Rebecca listened from the crew area, her career dissolving like sugar in rain. She could hear passengers throughout the aircraft discussing the incident, their voices carrying through the cabin walls like whispered verdicts. The elderly couple from 1C had called their children, describing the assault in shocked tones. The young mother was being interviewed live by Anderson Cooper via video call. Through her phone, Khalid's voice continued orchestrating the response to Rebecca's assault on his family. Legal department, I want federal charges filed immediately. Public relations, prepare a statement about our zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Human resources, audit our training programs for unconscious bias. This incident ends now. Rebecca's hand shook as she realized the scope of what she had triggered. This wasn't just termination. This was industry-wide transformation sparked by her moment of hatred. Emirates would implement new policies. Other airlines would follow, and her name would be attached to these changes forever. The aircraft's descent steepened as Dubai's skyline came into view, glittering like scattered diamonds against the desert landscape. But Rebecca saw only the approaching media circus, the federal agents who would be waiting, the lawsuit that would follow her for years. She had destroyed her life in 30 seconds of prejudice. Amara's phone buzzed with a text message from Khalid. Darling, the story is on every major news network. Rebecca Carlson is about to become the most expensive slap in aviation history. Justice is landing with us. The young mother's live stream chat exploded with comments as viewers realized they were witnessing history in real time. This is how change happens. That flight attendant just ended discrimination on airlines. Mrs. Al-Rashid is a queen. The viewer count surged past 300,000. Rebecca closed her eyes as the landing gear deployed, each mechanical sound marking another second closer to her complete ruin. She had awakened something she couldn't control, triggered consequences she couldn't escape. The woman she'd slapped for praying while Muslim was about to reshape the entire aviation industry through her husband's power and her own dignity. As the aircraft touched down on Dubai's runway, Rebecca Carlson's 12-year career ended with the screech of tires against asphalt. But Amara al-Rashid's revolution was just beginning. Federal agents and news crews surrounded the aircraft like antibodies attacking an infection. The most expensive slap in history had landed. Emirates Flight 237 had barely come to a complete stop when federal agents boarded the aircraft with the precision of a SWAT operation. Rebecca Carlson watched through the crew area window as Dubai International Airport transformed into a media battleground, with helicopters circling overhead and news trucks forming a metallic perimeter around their gate. Her 12-year career would end in handcuffs, but the shockwaves from her 30-second moment of hatred would reshape aviation forever. Special Agent Hassan Khalil approached Amara al-Rashid with a respectful demeanor reserved for someone whose husband controlled one of the world's largest airlines. "Mrs. al-Rashid, we have federal assault charges prepared against Ms. Carlson. Your testimony will be crucial for prosecution." Amara adjusted her hijab with the same dignity she'd maintained throughout the ordeal, baby Layla sleeping peacefully against her chest despite the chaos surrounding them. "Agent Khalil," Amara replied in perfect English, "I want this case to become precedent. No passenger should ever fear practicing their faith at 30,000 feet." Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who understood that her husband's position gave her words the weight of policy. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's prejudice. This was about institutional change. Rebecca was escorted from the crew area in zip-tie restraints, her Emirates uniform replaced with the orange jumpsuit of federal detention. As she passed Amara's seat, she stopped, her voice breaking with desperation and belated recognition of her catastrophic error. "Mrs. al-Rashid, I have 3 children. I was just doing my job. I thought." "You thought what?" Amara asked quietly, her dark eyes meeting Rebecca's for the first time since the assault. "That Muslims don't belong in first class. That prayer is terrorism. That my daughter and I deserve to be struck for practicing our faith." The questions hung in the pressurized air like accusations that no answer could satisfy. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. How could she explain years of accumulated prejudice? The Fox News programming that had convinced her that hijabs meant danger, the social media echo chambers that had turned her fear into hatred. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally, the words inadequate against the magnitude of her actions. "Your apology doesn't erase the handprint on my face," Amara replied with surgical precision. "But perhaps your consequences will prevent other flight attendants from making the same mistake." Agent Khalil resumed, escorting Rebecca toward the aircraft door, where federal marshals waited to process her into the system that would define the rest of her life. The young mother who had live-streamed the entire incident approached Amara cautiously, her phone still recording as her viewer count approached 500,000. "Mrs. al-Rashid, you've just changed everything. Do you realize that?" Her voice shook with the excitement of someone who had documented history in real time. "Change was inevitable," Amara replied, gently bouncing Layla as passengers began deplaning around them. Rebecca simply chose to be on the wrong side of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Khalid. "Darling, every major news network is requesting interviews. The president's office called. This story is reshaping civil rights discussions globally." As Amara finally stood to leave the aircraft, Captain Walsh approached one final time, his career hanging by threads as thin as spider silk. "Ma'am, is there anything Emirates can do to make this right?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. His entire crew's future depended on her response. "Captain," Amara said, adjusting her designer abaya as she prepared to face the media circus waiting outside. "What happened today wasn't about making things right. It was about making things change." She paused at the aircraft door, looking back at Seat 1A where her quiet prayers had triggered a revolution. "Your airline will implement mandatory anti-discrimination training within 30 days. Rebecca's assault on me will become required viewing for every flight attendant in your company." The Dubai heat hit like a wall as Amara emerged from the aircraft. But the real heat came from camera flashes and shouted questions from hundreds of international journalists. Mrs. Al-Rashid, how does it feel to be struck for praying? Will you sue Emirates? What message do you have for Muslim travelers? Amara raised her hand for silence, and the crowd of reporters fell quiet with the instant obedience that power commands. Baby Layla stirred in her arms, dark eyes opening to survey the chaos around them with the casual curiosity of someone born into privilege and protection. Today, Rebecca Carlson learned that prejudice has consequences, Amara announced, her voice carrying across the tarmac without amplification. But more importantly, the aviation industry learned that discrimination dies when it meets accountability. No passenger will ever again be assaulted for praying while Muslim, because the cost of hatred just became too expensive to afford. Behind her, Rebecca was loaded into a federal transport vehicle, her orange jumpsuit bright against the aircraft's white fuselage. News helicopters tracked her journey from the airport to federal detention, where she would await trial for assault charges that carried a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. Khalid al-Rashid emerged from a black Bentley that had been waiting on the tarmac, his presence commanding immediate attention from every camera and microphone. He approached his wife with the careful tenderness of someone whose wealth couldn't protect the people he loved from the world's cruelty, but whose power could ensure justice for that cruelty. Habibi, he said softly, switching to Arabic as he examined the fading handprint on her cheek. Are you hurt? But Amara smiled. The first genuine warmth she'd shown since Rebecca's assault had transformed her into an unwilling symbol of resistance. I'm fine, my love, she replied, switching back to English for the cameras. But Rebecca Carlson's life will never be the same. She looked directly into the CNN camera as she spoke. This is what happens when hate meets consequence. This is what justice looks like when victims have power. 6 months later, the Rebecca Carlson incident would be mandatory training material at every major airline worldwide. Emirates' stock price had soared as the company was praised for its swift response to discrimination. Rebecca herself was serving 18 months in federal prison, her story becoming a cautionary tale about the cost of prejudice in modern aviation. But in the immediate aftermath, as Dubai's skyline glittered in the distance and news crews packed their equipment, Amara al-Rashid stood on the tarmac holding her daughter, knowing that one moment of hatred had created a lifetime of change. Her phone buzzed one final time with a message from the young mother whose live stream had documented everything. Mrs. Al-Rashid, your story has inspired millions of people to speak up against discrimination. Rebecca's slap was heard around the world, but your dignity was louder. Amara smiled as she read the message, then looked up at the setting sun that had marked her prayer time hours earlier. The same prayer that had triggered Rebecca's assault was now being recited by thousands of Muslim passengers who no longer feared practicing their faith in the sky. The revolution that began with a slap had ended with transformation. The woman who had been struck for praying, while Muslim, had changed aviation forever. What discrimination will you document today? Share your stories in the comments below. Subscribe if you believe dignity isn't negotiable at any altitude. The next Amara al-Rashid is waiting for their live stream witness. Will that be you? Justice had landed. The real flight was just beginning.